So I'm really honored, and it's a pleasure to be part of this really special session. We did have a keynote planned, but I think because you were able to come, we sort of managed to really make sure that we can get in this session. So happy to welcome Per, who's the CEO of IKEA Foundation, with more than a decade of experience in philanthropy, being a leader in the development and climate space. We're really happy to have you. Thank you so much for coming, Per.
Thanks for having me. This is wonderful. I think I see more of my colleagues around this room today than I normally see in the office. So that's a really good start.
Okay, so thanks a lot. So I want to start off, Per, by you just got out from COP and you spent a while there. What are you most hopeful about? What's the hope coming out of COP?
I'll get to that in a moment, but before I do that, I really want to thank you, thank Harris, thank Selco for putting this event together. It's just amazing to see so many people coming together and talking about really, really important issues in life, and the fact that you have put this conference together, and actually you have the audacity to put the conference together with the subject of failure, I think is fantastic. And so far from my colleagues, I've heard, I just got in a few hours ago, but my colleagues told me that the attention to detail, the way you take care of every conference member here, it's just been fantastic. So I think we should give Selco and the team a big applause for what they've done. Then to COP. In many ways, COP was really a huge disappointment. Disappointment because we didn't really make any progress on the key issue of cutting fossil fuels. Actually, we had to fight to actually get to stay on the Paris Agreement, which is not the way we're going to make progress in the years to come and actually make it possible to cut greenhouse gases by 50% in 8 years. So in that sense, this was a disappointment. There were some really good things happening too. We shouldn't forget that. So the fact that the world agreed to fund the loss and damage fund, so that the people in the world who have the least responsibility for the impact of climate change, but have really the most suffering from a result of the climate change, actually get compensated in one way or another. Now, I realize this is a commitment to put a loss and damage fund in place, and that's basically what it is, and there's nothing more to it than right now. And my concern is that the commitment that the rich countries made in 2009 in Copenhagen to actually raise $100 billion a year to support the poorer countries in the world has never happened to that level. And I wonder if the loss and damage fund is going to have the same development. I hope not. I hope that we'll be able to see something very different. Now, let's talk about the hopes. I think what really gives me hope is partners like you, the partners we fund, and the huge progress that we're making together in driving for a positive development on the climate side. I think last year we launched in Glasgow the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, with an audacious goal on bringing access to renewable energy for 1 billion people in the world. We made some real progress in the last 12 months. We're operating in 12 countries, we have 26 programs running, and we're bringing together an alliance of all those who want to actually contribute, governments, civil society, foundations, business, to actually drive this forward and accelerate in a way that otherwise wouldn't be possible. That makes me hope. It makes me hope to see that the Science-Based Target Initiative that we started a few years ago is now having more than 3,000 companies committing to science-based target and basically committing to how they can maximize the effort they make as a company to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Makes me very happy to see that the methane hub is finally taken off. Methane, as you know, is a very potent greenhouse gas, and the methane hub is taking off, and there are multiple foundations and organizations coming together to actually drive a focus on reducing methane. So, but the final thing, and what makes me most positive is the interaction I have with young people, and the fact that young people have a different perspective. They are the victim of climate change. You know, I belong to the first generation that really felt the impact of climate change, and I'm also the last generation to do something about it. So I feel a huge responsibility for that. But young people encourages me to go faster, to do better. And I thought I'd mention an initiative that we did at COP, which was a real risky project. We actually teamed up with the UN. We created something called the UN Live. UN Live basically placed 27 containers around the world. In that container, you can actually, through technology, have a meeting with young people anywhere in the world. And I had discussions with young people in Africa, in India. We had one here in Bangalore, actually. And bringing young people's voice to the table, and those who are not at the table in COP, but need to be at the table. So we will use artificial intelligence, thanks to MIT in Boston, to actually capture the key messages and the trends and the concept, and we will share that. So this was a huge experiment, which is one other way of bringing young people to the table. So that makes me really optimistic.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think that's really strong takeaways and hope for us as well. 3 or 4 very strong points there. I just want you to reflect a little bit on your journey. And till date, was there anything that you would consider as your biggest success, or IKEA Foundation's for that matter? Like, what would you consider as a success?
Well, we've had a lot of successes, but it's not really us having the success, is our partners having the success, because all we do is provide money. Our partners actually do the job. So if we work with you and we build a long-term relationship to a Selco Foundation because we believe Selco can make a difference, it's Selco making the difference. We're just providing the money. I think if I look at the journey over all these years, what we have learned that's really important is that development takes time. If you want to be part of driving a systems change, that takes a long time and requires a very extraordinary collaboration. And I heard a lot from the last panel about collaboration, about bringing different partners together, and most importantly, working with the people on the ground, and working with the young people, and working with the communities you're trying to help. Not try to sit in New York and London and Geneva and develop solutions that's going to work for those people. It's not going to work. And I think that one of the things we started very early in our foundation is to see wherever we work, how we together with our partners bring the people we're trying to help and empower to create a better life for themselves to be part of the solution. That's sort of what you do in business. I came from business, so in business that's an obvious thing. You talk to your customers and you understand your customers and you deliver against your customers' expectations. And I think that's where we made a journey from being in a foundation that provided great charitable funding to good causes to actually being a foundation that's focused on the 2 most important challenges to young people living in the global south, which is climate change and poverty. So that's the only thing we work on, climate change and poverty.
But why do you feel we should be talking about this more? Why do you feel we should be talking about failures, about dissecting successes, about learnings? Like, what is the criticality right now? So, you know, we can spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year as a foundation because IKEA has been a very successful business. Right. The founder of IKEA sometimes came to meetings. He said, so what have been your latest failures? He believed so strongly in learning from failure that you learn so much better from failures than you learn from successes. And hiding failures was a sin in the IKEA organization, and it's still a sin. And it's a sin in our organization as well, because there's nothing better to learn from than the failures. And that means also that you need to have a good system around all your grant making to actually capture the learning from the grant making. So we put a lot of emphasis on making sure we have a strong and a robust system for monitoring and evaluation. We monitor to create evidence and to build our future investments on that evidence. If we don't have evidence available, we will probably take a lot of risk
And that's important because foundations should take risk. We are one of the few organizations that can actually take risk and fail. If we fail responsibly, it's okay. But we take risk and we drive learning out of that. So we put a lot of emphasis on trying to better understand what is the evidence available if we don't have evidence, what is the risk we're taking, and how do we make sure that we capture the learnings. And to capture the learnings, working with partners means that you need to have a partnership that is built on trust, on transparency, that we can talk together about what should be a course correction in the middle of a program because things are not, doesn't seem to work. As Stephanie would say, just don't cut the funding and go away, but actually work with the partners to see how can we do this differently and how can we learn from that. When we finalize a program and wonder where we're going to take it to the next level, that's one discussion. But equally important is that we invest in evaluating the success and the failures, and evaluating the program and sharing those evaluations. So every year we will spend millions of dollars on specific evaluation, on evaluation done by a neutral third party that looks at what has worked and what has not worked, and make sure that anyone who's interested can learn from that, because we share that learning with anyone who's interested. When we're not in a competitive environment, we just want to create as much impact as possible for the money we have available. And if others can not make the same mistakes that we did, that's good, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Right. No, absolutely. I think you couldn't agree more. Trust and transparency can get us sort of multi steps further. Before I get a couple of questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask a last question and then just open up a little bit for audience interaction. But in trying to do this, in trying to maintain trust, transparency, ensure that we're failing fast and forward and productively, what are some of the top lessons that you have learned in philanthropy as a leader? What are some of the top lessons in doing this better?
Well, it's really about how you build the partnerships and how you build partnerships for the long term, and how you build that partnership in a transparent and open way. And that takes time. Building relationships is not happening. Whether you and I build a relationship or we build a relationship with two organizations, that takes time. So you have to invest that time, personal time. And you can't do it on Teams, by the way. This doesn't work. So it requires you to go out and see people. And I think that's probably one of the key learnings. The second learning is you can't be successful without being very close to the field, close to the people that you're trying to help, and creating solutions with the beneficiaries, with the people who are the ones that you want to try to help to take themselves out of poverty. I also have learned something really important. I want to mention that so I have the chance before it's too late, okay? Because we have a situation in the world right now where we have an absolute existential threat, and that's climate change. And if we can't curb climate change and succeed in what we set out to do in the Paris Agreement, there won't be a livable planet for the next generations. Then everything else becomes secondary. And yet, 2%, less than 2% of philanthropy money today goes into climate change. Now that's a disgrace in one hand. But on the other side, you can say it's a huge opportunity, because there's 98% of philanthropy money that's spent somewhere else that should be spent on climate change. So we can actually be successful in curbing climate change and then focus on all the other areas. Because access to energy in rural India makes no difference if you can't live there.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you for your responses. I'm going to open up a little bit and see if we have any audience questions. Oh, there are already some questions on flux, but I see some hands up as well. There's one question that's already upvoted quite a bit, so maybe we start with that and then we can take some audience questions. So it says climate change or poverty are complex problems with many aspects causing them and many aspects affected by them. How do you ensure you see them in a system lens as a funder?
Well, when we focused on trying to provide energy to 1 billion people in the global south, we do that because we don't want the fossil fuel energy-driven fossil fuel-driven energy to expand in this part of the world. You know, this part of the world makes up so little of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the world, but that's where the biggest growth is. So we need to ensure that that growth is happening in a clean way and not driven by fossil fuels. So it's preventing new emissions to happen, at the same time working to curb the emissions that we have. So that will have to happen in two different parts of the world, because where the emissions are and where the biggest opportunities are in Europe, North America, China, to some extent India, that's a different story compared to actually providing energy to the poor. If we can provide energy to the poor, that's going to be the biggest lever for economic development in that part of the world, and that's why we think that the combination of bringing, attacking climate change and bringing energy to the poor means that attacks the two key threats to children's future. The way we look at it is the climate change side and the ability to build a livelihood for yourself that makes sure you can increase your income. And increasing your income, you will invest in your children's health and education, because that's what people do typically. And then we can drive development as in a parallel to curbing climate change. But it happens in two different places. And I don't think that it's fair to in any way curb the economic development in the global south, just because we have been doing what we've been doing in the Western world since the Industrial Revolution and put the world in a state where it's about to falter unless we do something drastically.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. There is also a question here that's, that says that, you know, IKEA championed modular design and do-it-yourself productization. Do these approaches have implications on how you've designed IKEA Foundation? I guess in general, what are some of the key philosophies or from IKEA, the business, that have made it their way into IKEA Foundation?
That's a great question. Who came up with that question? Yeah, great. I think the most important part that we have taken from IKEA to IKEA Foundation is a strong set of values that drives everything in IKEA. And IKEA is a company that is based on 10 base values, and if we had more time, I will talk about it, but I think one of the main values that I want to talk about now is a value called togetherness. We really believe in collaboration. We believe in bringing the parties around the table, have a transparent discussion, and make sure that everyone contributes and that everyone has a chance to contribute. So I think of everything we have done and taken with us from IKEA and learned from IKEA, it's really how we base our work on the same set of values, and that the values underpin the decisions we are making. And in that sense, caring for people and planet is another value, and it's driving everything IKEA does, and it's certainly driving everything we do. And we are super concerned about the trajectory that we see now, and we're going to do everything we can as a foundation to not only invest in organizations like Selco and others that are helping us curb climate change and bring energy to the poor, but also using our philanthropy money in a leveraged way. So meaning that if we can take our money to create that ecosystem that was discussed here, bringing in people who can create the ecosystem, and then bring the big investors in, such as the big development banks, for example, who sit on billions and billions of dollars but don't want to really take the risk. We can de-risk that, and that's what we're trying to do. So if we de-risk with our philanthropy funds, we can maybe achieve 10, 20, 30 times the amount of money going into installing renewable energy for those who have no access or very limited access to energy today.
Sure. There are quite a few questions here. I'm pretty sure people will be approaching you outside, but I'm just going to, if it's fine, I'll just go with the top questions here and not open it out to in person so we can save some time. Sorry? Yeah. Go. You were saying someone else? Okay. So, one of the questions is also around your experience in sharing failures in a manner that is that is productive and informative, but not seen negatively by others. So the perception around failure, I'm not sure if that's a real perception or if that's easy to deal with within IKEA Foundation and with partners, but is there a way to curb the negative perception around failure that you've experienced?
Well, first I would say that what we're trying to do is not make this a perceptional failure, but have a robust monitoring, learning, and evaluation system around it, so we can agree that what's success and what's failure. But in order to have an open and transparent discussions about that, you have to have that relationship and trust. You need to understand from a funder's perspective and from a partner's perspective that it's okay to fail if you do it responsibly and if you work to adjust quickly. And that's why we have this system where we monitor all the 179 grants we have operating right now. We have three KPIs for each grant. And we have an ongoing reporting system that tells us whether we are on track to do what we need to do, or we have to make course corrections. But that's okay. Yeah. And that when we have partners we work with for a long time, they understand that this is the way we look at things, this is the way we'd like to optimize the impact of our investments, and you can only optimize the impact if you understand what works and what doesn't work, and you learn from your mistakes and learn from your failures. So I hope we can create, or we have created an environment in our relationships to our 140 partners that this is okay to discuss, and it's okay to fail if you do it responsibly, even if you course correct on what you do. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to fund you in the future. That means that we have learned together and maybe can be even more effective in what we do in the future.
No, thank you so much, Per. I think that's super important, not only for other philanthropists and funders to learn from, but for, I think, even for practitioners and the sector and enterprises and NGOs to sort of, have that kind of, as Jay was also saying, that, okay, this is actually possible, that we can actually, fail together, learn, grow together, and it's not a, there need not be a negative connotation around it, which actually sort of prevents us from moving forward as society. I just want to thank you so much for being here, Per. I know that you've not had much rest even, and managed to make it for this event in time. So thank you so much. We will close there and move for lunch.